This is a recap compilation of every comic book issue that features Spider-Man and has a cover date from 1968. If you like what you watch, I release new recaps every Thursday as we aim to read every Spider-Man ever. Amazing Spider-Man issue 56. Spider-Man has lost his memory and he believes that he is Doctor Octopus's partner in crime. But as they head back to Doc Ock's base, Spidey is starting to have doubts. Why does he feel so guilty? Why do all his instincts despise Doc Ock? If only he could get his memory back. But his thoughts are interrupted by a police car which begins to chase their van. Doc Ock fires the nullifier at the car, disabling it, but the nullifier begins to smoke in the process. Something is wrong, and Spider-Man realizes that he knows something about the device, that he must be some kind of scientist. But if he was a scientist, why would he be wearing this silly costume? Back at the secret hideout, and Doc Ock has realized what is wrong with the nullifier. It's missing isotope 16, and Doc Ock knows exactly where to find some and commands Spider-Man to go and get it. But before he does, Doc Ock tells Spidey to just take off his mask to reveal his secret identity. This is a mistake, because Spidey wants to know why. If they're partners, why doesn't Doc Ock know who he is? And so Spidey hesitates. Before Spidey can work out the truth though, Doc Ock starts a fight and the two of them tussle before Doc Ock calls the whole thing off, claiming it was just a test to make sure that Spidey had really lost his memory. Spider-Man believes the Doctor, takes a map to his goal and swings off to steal some isotope. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Gwen Stacy and Harry Osborn are worried about Peter and they pay a visit to Aunt May's house. She also hasn't heard anything from her nephew and she starts to worry, and so Peter's friends console her. He's probably busy chasing up this story about Spider-Man joining Doc Ock, taking some pictures for Jonah. And elsewhere once more, John Jameson is leading a security council to come up with a plan to retrieve the nullifier. His team tell him that they have eyes and men on all exits out of town, before a lone voice says that maybe they're overlooking something. Maybe the Doctor isn't trying to leave. That man is Captain Stacy, who has come out of retirement to help John Jameson. He's also Gwen's father. Elsewhere, Spider-Man has come to the fort where the isotope is being stored. He's at war with himself, as everything inside him is rebelling against what he's doing. But he sneaks in, using his strength that he didn't know he had, and he steals the isotope. When guards interrupt him, he webs them up and dives out of a window, losing his map in the process. And he swings away, leaving it. He's sure that he could web it back to him, but something in the back of his mind didn't want to. Wanted to leave the map for others to find. And others do find it, namely John Jameson, who now knows exactly where Doc Ock is hiding with the nullifier. Spider-Man arrives back at the now no longer secret base with the isotope. He surrenders it to Doc Ock before a henchman notices the lack of map. It seems that Spider-Man has outlived his usefulness and Doctor Octopus strikes him. The two of them fight, with Doc Ock constricting Spidey in tentacles before Spider-Man webs his feet and pulls him off balance. Spidey is dodging a piledriver attack from Ock's tentacles when suddenly they hear a noise from outside. It's John Jameson with the army. They flood the room with smoke bombs, recover the nullifier and fire it at Doc Ock. The device that disables guns and phones and cars and superhero memories also disables Doc Ock's arms and he's helpless. Except he still has Spider-Man. The Doctor commands our hero to attack, to save him and to save himself. After all, Spider-Man is a criminal now. Spidey walks threateningly towards Jameson, his mind in torment. But in the end, he chooses to do nothing. Doc Ock is no partner of his. The Doctor is then arrested for the theft of the nullifier, his mechanical arms stripped from him. When the army goes to arrest Spider-Man too, he swings away, and Jameson stops his men from firing at the hero. That man, Jameson says, has something that he needs to work out. And Jameson is right. Spider-Man still doesn't know who he is. He pulls off his mask and looks at his reflection, and he does not recognize it. He's just somebody with no yesterdays and no tomorrow. Thor issue 148. In previous issues that don't involve Spider-Man, Odin has banned his subjects from visiting Earth. And when he finds Thor, Loki, Lady Sif and Balder there, as Thor and Loki fight each other, Odin zaps them and removes their powers. They are powerless. Despite this, Thor still wants to keep fighting, but Loki understands that he is absolutely not Thor's equal in strength, and so he flees instead. Thor doesn't chase him because of honor. Meanwhile and elsewhere, the homes of rich people are being robbed by a man called the Wrecker, who is tying up butlers and ransacking the jewelry. One policeman calls him a menace, and another is thankful that he's just an ordinary man and not superpowered at all. Because imagine how disastrous that would be if he had superpowers, which seems like an overly specific and definitely foreboding thing to say. Meanwhile, the Wrecker looks for a new victim. That victim, it turns out, is Loki, who is using magic to call on Enchantress, asking her to give him power once more so that he can defeat Thor. But the Wrecker doesn't know any of that, and he hits Loki over the head with a crowbar and steals his hat, just in time for the Enchantress to appear. She confuses the Wrecker for Loki and grants him godlike powers. When Loki comes to, the Wrecker learns just how powerful he is when he zaps Loki and teleports him far away. With this kind of power, the world is his. Elsewhere, Thor, Sif and Balder are taking in a mortal life by watching the news. Some kind of story about Spider-Man, probably calling him a menace. Suddenly, the news is interrupted by more news. Breaking news. The Wrecker is literally breaking the city. Our three heroes race to the rescue. They find the Wrecker knocking down a building and they confront him. With his new magic, the Wrecker vanishes Sif and Balder, sending them far away, and goes crowbar to hammer with Thor. They spatang and they fatam and they brooch before the Wrecker is able to get the upper hand, slam Thor down into the rubble, and wraps him up into a chokehold. Our hero is losing. Elsewhere, we learn that the Wrecker has been sending people to Asgard. Sif and Balder rush to Odin to inform him of the danger that Thor is in, requesting aid, but Odin silences and dismisses them both. His son hath erred, and must pay his penance. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is Amazing Spider-Man issue 57. Despite defeating Doc Ock in the last issue, Spider-Man still has no memory of who he is, and he's lost and he's hungry. To cope with the hunger, he whisks away a sandwich from a high-rise party and eats it while sticking to the wall. Then, when it rains, he finds shelter in the roof of a train station, falling into a fitful sleep. Elsewhere, his Aunt May is struggling to sleep, filled with worry over her missing nephew. She's convinced something terrible has happened to him. Getting out of bed, she decides to call his roommate one more time, but quivers and faints to the ground instead. Aunt Anna calls for the doctor while we whisk across town to a meeting where John Jameson is being admonished for letting Spider-Man get away last issue. Captain Stacy is in his corner though, and he says that he's been studying Spider-Man for a long time and is skeptical that the hero has broken bad. But the older Jameson won't hear it, and he has a plan to do what his son couldn't. And so we fly over to JFK Airport, where a man named Lord Plunder arrives with his pet saber-toothed tiger called Zabu. He is in the US to meet with lawyers and officially accept an inherited fortune. When he arrives at his hotel room, he rips off his suit, more comfortable as Kazar, Lord of the Jungle, than Lord Plunder. He just can't bear the trappings of civilization. His monologuing is interrupted by a knock on the door. It's J. Jonah Jameson. Once Jonah has calmed down from seeing a saber-toothed tiger, he explains to Kazar about the menace known as Spider-Man and offers money for his capture. Kazar accepts. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Harry Osborn, Peter's roommate, is searching Peter's room for some clue to where his friend has gone. On the floor of a closet, he discovers one of Peter's spider tracers and quickly puts two and two together. Peter Parker is Spider-Man's victim. Peter Parker must have been kidnapped by Spider-Man. It's the only explanation that makes sense. Elsewhere, Spider-Man is searching for John Jameson. Since John let him escape, he must know more about who Spider-Man is, and Spider-Man is looking for those answers. Spidey finds John Jameson with Captain Stacy, and he quickly explains that he has lost his memory. But before he can find a solution, Gwen arrives to see her dad, and the moment that she sees Spider-Man, she yells and cries that Spider-Man has stolen her boyfriend. Even more confused, Spider-Man flees. Meanwhile, Kazar is on the hunt. He tracks Spidey's scents to the Grand Central Terminal, then spots a fragment of his suit on a wall, and then he swings past the open window where Jameson and Stacy discuss Spidey's innocence. He's getting closer. Spider-Man's next plan to find out who he is to check in with the local newspaper, the Daily Bugle. He swings into J. Jonah Jameson's office, and Jonah quickly learns of Spidey's amnesia. Taking quick advantage, Jonah pretends to be a fan who likes Spidey, but he likes him better without the mask. And Spider-Man believes him. He begins to take off his mask and reveal his secret identity when Kazar bursts through the window. As the Jungle Man and Spider-Man fight, Jonah is distraught. He was this close to discovering Spider-Man's secret identity. Spider-Man tries to flee the building, but Kazar is able to lasso his leg and straddle the wall crawler. Spidey is able to knock Kazar off the wall with a punch, drawing the attention of Zabu, his tiger. But when he tries to escape across a wire, Kazar recovers and springboards to him, knocking him down into a woodland area. It's Kazar's type of terrain. But the terrain does very little, as Kazar soon finds himself in a battle of strength with Spidey, who is much stronger and is able to strike a powerful blow. But before Spider-Man can strike again, he's pounced upon by Zabu, and they both fall into a lake, and only Zabu re-emerges. Kazar recovers and dives in after Spidey, finding him unresponsive. He pulls him from the water. The battle now ended, maybe forever. Not Brand Echh, issue 6. Peter Pooper is in love, but he can't tell his aunt about this mystery woman, not until he's married her. His aunt is much too fragile. After all, she's had 57 heart attacks this week. Instead, he swings out into the streets as Spidey-Man, but he's more interested in picking flowers for his love than fighting crime. The next day, his love-struck expression gives the game away, and his aunt knows that he's in love. She has a heart attack, as expected, and is angry that he's choosing another woman over her. But Peter is oblivious to all of this, and he goes about his day. He's so distracted that he accidentally uses skunk oil for a science experiment, and he's so in love that he takes pictures of lovebirds to show to Jonah. When he gets a letter from his beloved, he can now finally announce the news to his aunt that he's getting married, and his aunt has a second heart attack. As Peter Pooper, he goes to invite all his friends to Spidey-Man's wedding, but they all hate Peter, and they kick him out of the caffeinated bean cafe. And so he's forced, as Spidey-Man, to invite all of his villains instead. The big day arrives, and all of those villains gather on a rooftop, and Doctor Doom advertises a movie coming in 2026. They're excited to meet Spidey's bride, and the man of the moment arrives. Spidey-Man holds out his hand and opens it, revealing his beloved. It's the Wisp, and they get married on that rooftop. Excited, Peter rushes home to tell his aunt and show her his new wife. But before he has a chance to speak, Aunt May just swats at the bug in his hand. Anyway, what was he planning to say? Was his wife now dead? Peter just slinks away upstairs, distraught. Amazing Spider-Man issue 58. Unlike what you might have suspected last issue, Spider-Man is not dead. Kazar has used his jungle senses to detect that our hero now lives, and so he uses his saber-toothed tiger, Zabu, to distract the police while he swings Spidey to safety. On a rooftop, Kazar mentions Jameson, the man that hired him to hunt Spidey, and Spider-Man comes too, angry to hear the name. But wait, he knows the name? He has his memory back. It seems that hitting the water with enough of a shock to the system that it cured his amnesia. He explains all of this to Kazar, who uses his jungle senses to know that Spidey speaks the truth, and then Kazar leaps down and away to the streets below to give the police a lecture on guns and leaves with Zabu. Meanwhile, Jonah gets a phone call from Professor Smythe, the man that built Spider Slayers, and elsewhere, John Jameson has deployment orders and wishes Captain Stacy well. He's sorry that he can't stay to clear Spider-Man's name. And elsewhere again, at the hospital, Gwen Stacy and Harry Osborn are watching over Aunt May, who keeps calling for Peter in her sleep. And back with Jonah again, and he's meeting with Smythe to see his brand new Spider Slayer. It can track a lone spider scent in the middle of a jungle and is stronger than ever before. But don't worry, Jonah, it will capture Spider-Man. The Slayer in the name is just for dramatic effect. Jonah agrees to bankroll the robot, and his face appears as he begins to pilot it. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Spider-Man hitches a ride home on the top of a bus and is about to get changed when his spider sense goes off. He puts his mask back on and he looks outside to find a spider slayer walking up the wall after him, with Jonah's face leering at him. Spidey tries to kick the slayer, but it does very little damage, and he narrowly avoids a heavy punch in return. When he tries to flee, the slayer shoots a laser at him, but there's a second voice that doesn't belong to Jonah. Someone else in the background. It's Smythe, who has taken over the Slayer from Jonah and wants a more serious end to Spidey. The Slayer chases Spider-Man across a wall and forces open a door to get to Spidey inside. But Spider-Man tricks Smythe into shooting at the beams above them, bringing the roof down on the Slayer. Not enough to destroy the robot, but enough to give Spidey time to look Smythe up in the phone book. With the information he needs, Spider-Man flees across town, while Jonah realizes that he's working with a madman who never wanted to just capture Spidey. Smythe just wanted revenge. Spider-Man reaches a house, and Smythe gloats over the screen. They're not even at that house. They're in Jonah's office, and that means Spidey is trapped. But when Smythe goes to attack with his Spider Slayer, it's unresponsive. When he cranks it up to full power, the Spider Slayer explodes. Spider-Man expected that it was sensing his spider impulse, and he took a guess that by adding in hundreds more spiders, like the kind found at Smythe's house, he might overload the system. And he was right. And Jonah kicks Smythe out of his office, threatening to call the police. Finally, back at home, Peter Parker tries calling his aunt, but there's no answer. She'd never stay out this late. So he grabs his clothes and he leaves to find her, bumping into a strange man on the street below and his saber-toothed tiger, who seem a little confused. They were sure that they'd sensed Spider-Man. In Daredevil issue 38, Daredevil and Doctor Doom swapped bodies. That all got fixed within the issue, but Doom, using a device to sound like Daredevil, has warned the Fantastic Four that Doctor Doom is going to attack them in the body of Daredevil, even though it's just Daredevil looking for help. And with that confusing introduction, we're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is Fantastic Four issue 73, The Flames of Battle. The Fantastic Four are awaiting the attack. They have sent Sue away to safety and have a giant gun to take care of any Doom problem. When Johnny Storm sees Daredevil up ahead, he flies after him, but fortunately Daredevil is able to dodge any attack, able to feel the torch's heat before it hits him. Luring the torch away, Daredevil manages to trick him into flying into a water reservoir, dousing his flame and knocking him out. As Daredevil pulls Johnny to safety and contemplates just leaving this all alone, he bumps into Spider-Man, because this is Marvel's New York. Daredevil explains the situation, that the Fantastic Four thinks that he's Doom, and Spider-Man agrees to help. Spidey also saw someone earlier who could help, and he swings around until he finds Thor. But Thor has other pressing matters. He's busy battling the Wrecker, and he refuses to help, although he's kept around just a little bit longer when Spider-Man calls him a chicken. Unable to wait for Spider-Man, Daredevil approaches the Baxter building and is instantly ensnared by Reed Richards. Reed just wants to talk, to find out what Daredevil Doom did with Johnny, but the Thing won't listen. He keeps on attacking, and Reed is forced to use his nerve blast ray on his teammate, just to get a few moments to talk. And so they do that. They talk as Daredevil untangles himself from Reed, and Daredevil realizes that there's no real way for him to prove who he is. As Daredevil comes to this realization, the Thing grapples our hero, and they both trip over Reed and fall into that giant gun on the rooftop, and it explodes. Seeing the explosion from afar, Spidey is finally able to convince Thor to help, but Thor has had his powers removed by Odin. See Thor 148 for details. And so Thor holds on to Spider-Man's back, and they both swing to the rescue. But Johnny Storm has recovered from his fight with Daredevil, and he sees the two heroes. Thinking that they're both lifelike robots created by Doom, he flies over to attack. And so all the players are here on the roof of the Baxter building, and the battle begins. First up is Thor versus the Thing, and this is mostly just the two of them punching each other. Thor doesn't have his powers anymore, but he's still Asgardian, and he can stand up against the Thing's mightiest blows, although he is starting to lose. Next up is Spider-Man versus the Human Torch. The Torch chases Spidey as our hero dodges his flames and attempts to swing away. When Spidey stops on a roof, the Human Torch flies fast at him, only to realize that it's the roof of a chemical plant and he's heading for a chimney and he can't stop in time. When he hits it, his flames ignite the chemicals coming out of the top, and there's another explosion in this issue. Last up, Daredevil faces off against Mr. Fantastic, and they end up smashing through the roof into the lab below. Reed is able to stretch himself into a blanket and smother Daredevil, but Daredevil reaches out for a power rod and zaps Mr. Fantastic. Daredevil leaps to escape, but is knocked down again by a stretchy fist. On the rooftop above, the Thing smashes the floor and knocks Thor off balance. But when he goes to deliver a final knockout punch, he hits something invisible that isn't Thor, and Thor is unhurt. And below, in the lab, Reed Richards has Daredevil wrapped up in his arms and also moves to deliver a final punch, but that too is blocked. Both punches were blocked by Sue Storm, the Invisible Woman, who has used her force fields to block the attacks, and explains that she knows that Daredevil isn't Doom. You see, Dr. Doom is live on television in Latveria addressing ministers. All of this was just a big misunderstanding. Also, Spider-Man and Johnny Storm are both here at the end, so the explosion seemingly did nothing. Our accused heroes depart, and Reed and Sue make out. Spider-Man has been spotted by the police, who still think that he's a wanted criminal. But Spidey doesn't have time. He has to make it to his Aunt May in hospital, and so he thwips their guns away, webs up their spotlight, and wraps them all up in a net. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is Amazing Spider-Man issue 59, The Brand of the Brainwasher. By stealing a directory and getting changed in an elevator, Peter Parker finally arrives in his aunt's hospital room. They embrace, and May feels better just knowing that he's okay. But when she asks where he's been, Peter falters. He was so anxious to see his Aunt May that he forgot to make up a story, but he's saved by the doctor, who shoos him away, keen for May not to have any excitement. But the doc is glad that Peter's safe, after he'd been reported as a missing person. Now knowing that he was reported missing, Peter reports to the police and faces a barrage of questions. Why did Spider-Man do it? Can Peter lead them to Spider-Man's hideout? Tell them everything that he learned. Captain Stacy, who Peter's meeting for the first time, settles the crowd and asks a simple question. Spider-Man claimed to have lost his memory. Do you, Peter Parker, know anything about that? And Peter does, and he tells them the almost truth. That Spider-Man lost his memory and was convinced to join Doc Ock. That he'd seen Peter following them and thought that Peter was an enemy and had kidnapped him. But when Spidey got his memory back, he let Peter go. And the police seemed to believe him. When a report comes in for the police commissioner about some dangerous mobsters being released on bail, Captain Stacy asks for a few moments of Peter's time. The captain takes Peter to his home and reveals that he's been studying Spider-Man. He believes that Spider-Man is youthful and intelligent and seemingly driven by some inner compulsion. He wants to know whether Peter agrees with his assessment. But before Peter can answer, their conversation is cut short by Gwen Stacy, Peter's girlfriend. She hugs Peter, happy to see him, and before Captain Stacy can continue the conversation, Gwen asks to take Peter away. Harry's at the coffee bean and hasn't seen Peter in ages. And so, Peter is whisked away and meets up with Harry, who has long forgotten being angry at our hero. But where's MJ? Turns out she has a new job as a dancer at the new club called Gloom Room A Go-Go. Meanwhile and elsewhere, two other figures are discussing MJ, the mysterious brainwasher and a lackey. The plan is to have her dancing and taking photos of guests, unaware that the flashbulbs are hypnotic, and they will make the guests return to the club a second time to be brainwashed by a special machine. Their initial trial has already been a success when a hypnotized DA released some men of theirs. Hey, just like the report the police were talking about. And the next step is to invite top officials and to get the entire government under the brainwasher's control. The next morning, Spider-Man is back to his old routine, webbing up criminals. But it's a shame the criminals will just be set free again soon, according to some shopkeeper. But Spider-Man doesn't have time to think about that. He's got to get home and rest so that he's ready to see MJ's grand opening at the club. And elsewhere, MJ is being taught all about her new job, to dance and then take photos of the guests, but only the ones with the star symbol on their table. And then it's opening night, and Peter, Gwen and Harry are there to support their friend. Captain Stacy is there too, after receiving a free invite, and so are many other important figures for the city. MJ dances, winning over the crowd with her moves before she begins to take pictures. She takes a picture of Captain Stacy, who suddenly starts to feel dizzy. He goes outside for some air, but he ends up in the back of the club where the Brainwasher's crew grab him, ready to take him under their control. Realizing that the captain has been gone for too long, Peter slips away, sure that the camera must have had something to do with the disappearances. He changes into Spider-Man and takes out some goons backstage, but they're able to activate an alarm and warn of Spidey's arrival. Several men with guns turn out to hunt Spider-Man down, but he is Spider-Man and he makes short work of all of them. But just as Spidey is about to get one of the henchmen to talk and reveal the big plan, another man grabs his gun and grabs MJ as a hostage. But again, this is Spider-Man we're talking about, and our hero webs the barrel of the gun shut from several feet away and then swings down to both kick the gangster and sweep MJ up into his arms. He leaves MJ safely on the ground and heads further backstage, smashing through a guarded door where he discovers Captain Stacy, freshly brainwashed. But who's behind this plot? Not the scientist that's running the machine, but a man called the Brainwasher, who grabs Spidey's wrist and is revealed to be the Kingpin all along. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's Superman, crashing headfirst into a comic book publisher's building. But to find out why, we have to learn his origin. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is not Brand Echh, issue 7. The planet Krypton is about to explode, and so Superman's parents put him on a rocket as a baby. But they have to do it quickly because they only have one panel. He shoots off to Earth, says his first word, "Help!" and lands on the farm of Mr. and Mrs. Kettle. They raise him into a strapping young man with superpowers who is unrecognizable when he puts on glasses. Now going by Cluck Kettle, Superman moves to the big city. He gets a job as a reporter, gets arrested for indecent exposure for changing in a payphone, wins the heart of one Locust Payne, and single-handedly wins World War II. He also wins the attention of two men who work for Natural Comics, who want him to star in a comic for them. He agrees, for money of course. As soon as he signs a contract, Natural Comics begins to make changes. They change his costume to make it more modern, and they make him more resilient and much faster and much stronger. And when he gets too strong, they introduce Kryptonite, his one weakness, which now everybody has access to. So he's always being beaten up. Superman resorts to hiding in a box just to get away. He's brought out of hiding by a dog. But not just any dog, it's Superdog, a new character introduced by Natural Comics. They're flying around as buddies when they're hit by a kryptonite bomb, losing the power to fly. They're falling to their doom, but they're saved by Supergirl, another new character introduced by Natural Comics. But then, they're all hit by another kryptonite bomb, and they're saved by Sneaky the Stupercat, another new character. And they're flown to Stuperland, where Superman meets Super Monkey and Super Snake and Super Horse and a whole menagerie of super animals. But at least, Superman is the only male adult. Well, unless you count Super Grandpa and Super Uncle and Super Brother-in-law, and Superman has had enough. And that is why, right at the beginning of this comic, he flew headfirst into Natural Comics, so that he could grab the two employees that he signed the contract with and throw them onto a rocket ship filled with all the other super characters and blast all of them into space. At last, he is alone again. At last, he is the only superhero. Well, until he discovers New York and all of the Marvel comic characters that live there. The Inferior Five are Dumb Bunny, White Feather, Awkward Man, Blimp, and Merry Man, and they see an old lady getting mugged. They jump to the rescue, only to be mistaken for dangerous masked men and get beaten up by the old lady. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is Inferior 5, Issue 7, Drainy Day. The old lady's mugger gets away, and the Inferior Five chase him down into the sewers. Down there, a salesman offers a tour or some scenic postcards, but there's no time. There's a criminal to catch. They're interrupted in their chase by a flying hammer, which hits Awkward Man on the head. It belongs to Thor, God of Thunder, who the Inferior Five met a few issues back. Thor has signed a contract with a man named Stanley who wants a completely different look. And so, with the help of the salesman from before, who happens to have all the barber equipment they need, the Inferior Five give him a shave and a bleach, so he's a whole new man. As the Inferior Five progress further into the sewers, they meet more familiar faces. When they're trapped in a room which gets flooded with water, they're rescued by the Submoron, who's looking for Thor. They're told by Allergy Queen, a detective who is allergic to superheroes, and a reference to Ellery Queen, that a mastermind is plotting in the sewers, but his informant is turned to dust before he can reveal the mastermind's name. Allergy Queen is also allergic to dust. And when the team is trapped by metal poles coming out of the walls, they're rescued by Iron Pants, who is also looking for Thor. The Inferior Five keep wandering the sewers, lost and bumping into cameo after cameo after cameo, eventually running into the most important cameo of all, the Cobweb Kid, with his own theme song, Cobweb Kid does whatever a spider did. He's standing on the ceiling until the Inferior Five point it out, and then their worldview turns and they crash to the ground. Their adventures in the sewers eventually lead them to a giant octopus whose grabby nature reminds Dumb Bunny of her ex-boyfriends, and they fall through a secret door to find a banquet filled with people. Dead people. Because everyone here is dead. But who did it? As per tradition, they gather into a study, and Allergy Queen reveals who the murderer is. The murderer is... and then he is zapped and turned to dust, allergic to himself. But the Inferior Five spotted the culprit. It was the old lady from the start, and she reveals herself to be Dr. Diabolical. He traps our heroes in glass containers. His plan is to siphon the best parts of them. Merry Man's intellect, Blimp's flying power, Awkward Man and Bunny's strength, and White Feather's archery skill into Muggsy, the mugger from the beginning. Remember him? But the machine is set up wrong, and it takes the Inferior Five's worst parts instead. White Feather's lack of courage, Blimp's slow speed, Dumb Bunny's intelligence, Awkward Man's agility, and Merry Man's strength. And now the Inferior Five don't have any of those weaknesses, and they bravely and intelligently break out of their glass prisons, defeat all the bad guys, and destroy the machine, which returns them to normal, while Dr. Diabolical escapes in an ejector seat. Back on the surface, the Inferior Five bump into a familiar old lady, Dr. Diabolical in disguise, and so they beat her up, only to learn that she's a real old lady, and Cobweb Kids aren't. The Kingpin is the brainwasher and is brainwashing Captain Stacy, and when Spider-Man discovers this, the Kingpin instantly attacks him. Spidey is able to get on top, but the big man won't fall, and the Kingpin is able to grab our hero and hurl him away. But by spinning in the air, Spider-Man is able to collide with the brainwashing equipment, shutting it down in a cloud of smoke and fleeing to fight another day. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is Amazing Spider-Man issue 60, Oh Bitter Victory. The Kingpin and his lackey are able to repair their device and finish the brainwashing of one Captain George Stacy. Kingpin is now his master. George will obey all orders. Outside, in the club, his daughter Gwen begins to worry about her father's location and the whereabouts of her boyfriend. The worry is only worsened when MJ arrives and tells them of the big fight that happened backstage. Fortunately, George Stacy shows up to ease their minds. No need to worry, there's nothing going on, and he can't wait for MJ to dance some more. And Peter? He's probably taking some photographs. The truth is that Peter is perched on a rooftop, affected by that electric shock that he got from the machinery. He just can't seem to see straight, seeing everything double. When he attempts to jump down, he grabs for the wrong flagpole, and later he webs the wrong building. He can't see Gwen like this, so he takes a bus home. That night, Peter is beset with nightmares, imagining that Captain Stacy has been forced to work for the Kingpin and that Spider-Man will have to fight him. How can he battle the father of the woman that he loves? And then he realizes this is the first time that he's admitted his feelings for Gwen. In the morning, his eyesight's still blurry, but getting better. He heads over to see Gwen. Much to Gwen's flirty dismay, Peter is more interested in her father, wanting to know how he is. As Gwen goes to make coffee, Peter probes the captain with questions about last night, questions about Spider-Man. Surely the Spidey curious captain will be interested in the webhead's appearance. But the captain is uninterested and angry, and when Peter turns his back, Captain Stacy moves to strike him. But Pete's spider sense warns him, and he's able to counter the old man, knocking him down just as Gwen arrives with refreshments. All she sees is her boyfriend hitting her old dad, and she banishes Peter. She never wants to see him again. Later that evening, when he's alone, Captain Stacy calls the Kingpin and warns him of the snooping teenager Peter Parker. And so Kingpin puts out a hit on the teenager. Fortunately for Peter, he's busy visiting Aunt May when the goons pay a visit to his apartment. Instead of finding Peter, those goons find Harry, and so they trash the place in case Parker was hiding and leave Harry with a warning. Peter arrives 5 minutes later, suddenly aware of how dangerous things have become. Even without his eyesight fixed, he has to take on the Kingpin now. However, when he arrives at the club, he sees Captain Stacy leaving with some of Kingpin's men and decides to tail them instead. They head to the police station, where Captain Stacy accesses the records room, easy to do with his reputation, even though he's retired. They're planning to steal records, so Spider-Man leaps through the window to stop them. He's able to handle Kingpin's goons, but he can't hit Gwen's dad, and so the captain gets a good swing at our hero, knocking him down. The captain and the men flee, making up an alibi that they saw Spider-Man stealing from the records room and stopped him. But Peter Parker knows that that's not true. Even better, Peter set up his camera before the fight and has evidence of the captain's attempted theft. But who can he trust when anybody could be under the control of the Kingpin? He only has one option, and he knows that it's going to break Gwen's heart. He sells the photo to Jonah. And so, Gwen Stacy, who is just trying to get her mind off of Peter, discovers that her father is a criminal on the front page of the Bugle. And her ex-boyfriend Peter, well, he took the picture. There is a man known as the Sorcerer who, after months of preparation, is finally able to put his plan into action to kill Spider-Man. He sends out psychic waves across the country and finds Spider-Man on a rooftop, surveying criminals, and the Sorcerer invades our hero's mind. His powers cause pain and weakness for Spidey, who crashes into a wall and falls through a skylight, helpless at the feet of 3 criminals. We're reading Every Spider-Man Ever, and this is Marvel Superheroes issue 14, The Reprehensible Riddle of the Sorcerer. Even in pain and dizzy from the psychic onslaught, Spider-Man is still able to stand up against these crooks. He webs their guns away, dodges attacks, and pulls his punches so that he doesn't kill them. And, fortunately for him, that's enough for them to flee right into the arms of the police. If they'd fought for a moment longer, Spider-Man wasn't sure he'd be able to hold out. As our hero is left wondering what happened and hoping to get home to bed, we learn the backstory of the Sorcerer. He was just a regular man with psychic abilities, but he was weak and untrained, and so he sought out mystic mentors from all around the world to hone his abilities. And now, he's ready, and with the help of the Psycho Intensifier that amplifies his psychic power, he can put his consciousness in the body of someone who will destroy Spider-Man. To prove this point, he does something completely different. He pokes a replica of Spider-Man and gives Peter Parker a painful headache hundreds of miles away. The Sorcerer then packages up the Spider-Man doll with a pin in the head and posts it to Spider-Man, care of the US Postal Service, expecting police to open it in the future and discover who defeated Spider-Man. The next morning, Peter Parker is still feeling unwell due to the psychic pin in his brain. He calls the doctor, who can't find anything wrong with him, but prescribes some medicine just in case. And that package that the Sorcerer sent arrives at the post office. As Peter tries to rest, the Sorcerer connects to his Psycho Intensifier and takes control of Spider-Man. Peter, unable to resist these unseen instructions, walks out into the street and gets in a taxi, much to Harry's surprise, who thinks that his roommate must be sleepwalking. Peter then spends his savings on a flight to New Orleans and takes a taxi to a hotel when he gets there, and he has no idea why. With Peter in his hotel room, the Sorcerer finally relinquishes control to not overtax himself, and his package is being inspected by the police and written off as a practical joke that they should just return to sender. In New Orleans, for some reason, and unable to rest due to a parade, Peter puts on his Spider-Man costume and heads outside to investigate. However, as soon as he's outside, he's controlled once more and finds himself unconsciously walking towards a warehouse. Inside the warehouse is a crate, and inside that crate is a synthetic man. When Spider-Man tries to punch this new enemy, the man's body is rubber and his fist stretches through to the other side. On a second attack, Spider-Man finds the man's body to be rock solid and he almost breaks his hand in the process. He also learns, after firing some web, that the man's headband can fire a laser. Spider-Man has no idea why he's here and he has no idea how to beat this brute, and he's still feeling dizzy from that psychic attack. He's able to dodge certain attacks, but anything he returns is useless, and eventually he gets hit hard enough and then thrown out into the parade outside. The sorcerer's plan has come to fruition, except that the sorcerer sent the Spider-Man doll that was assumed to be a prank and then returned back to him, and the postman, returning it back to him, rings the doorbell, unaware that the noise of the bell is at just the right frequency, that it messes with the psycho intensifier and it kills the sorcerer. He just dies because of the doorbell. And without anybody controlling him, the synthetic man stops trying to kill Spider-Man and just walks off into the sea. And Spider-Man has no idea what just happened. Thanks to photographs taken by Peter Parker, Gwen has learned that her father is a criminal. When she confronts him, demanding to know why, he explains that he doesn't know, that he was just following some orders. Orders that are now telling him to leave and go into hiding. Not wanting to leave him alone, Gwen goes with her father, and so they're gone when their phone rings, and Peter, on the other end, is worried that something has happened to them, that the Kingpin has silenced them for good. As Spider-Man, he races to the rescue and comes face to face with some of Kingpin's goons. We're reading Every Spider-Man Ever, and this is Amazing Spider-Man issue 61, What a Tangled Web We Weave. The goons never stood a chance against Spider-Man, who takes them out with ease. But when he tries to get an answer out of one, he finds out that they've all been brainwashed and they know nothing. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Harry picks Mary Jane up in his car. He's worried about Peter, Gwen and George all being missing, but MJ is sure that they'll show up. She's more worried about getting paid for her dancing. She's then shocked to learn that the club has closed down and she won't be getting any of her money. And elsewhere once more, and Norman Osborn gets a phone call about an unauthorized delivery. He discovers that it was ordered by Dr. Winkler, the scientist that has been working with the Kingpin, finally given a name, and Norman admonishes him. All equipment needs to be approved. And then Norman leaves, and so he's unaware that the Kingpin has been using Oscorp as a new base. Addressing his goons, the Kingpin gives some orders. He wants George Stacy killed. For taking photographs, he also wants Peter Parker killed, but most of all, he wants Spider-Man killed. If they capture George Stacy, tracking him with a special device, they can lay a trap for Spider-Man. But won't Norman Osborn discover them plotting inside of his company? No. The Kingpin is confident that Norman Osborn has other things to concern himself with. And he's right. An advert for a documentary about the Green Goblin has triggered a memory in Norman, and he can't quite make sense of what he's feeling. Spider-Man said that Norman had helped him get rid of the Green Goblin, but he has no memory of how he helped. Later, at an airport, Kingpin's device leads his men to where George Stacy is, before he's able to flee the country. They kidnap both George and his daughter Gwen, and as this is going down, Spider-Man is preparing and investigating. He makes himself a gas mask that lightly sits under his regular mask, and he discovers an Osborn connection in the closed down nightclub. And so, when Gwen and her father are tied together under a large vat of imposing pink liquid, Spider-Man smashes through the window to the rescue. And when the Kingpin tries to use his gas trick again, Spidey's new mask protects him, and our hero is able to fight back. But Spider-Man was too busy worrying about the Kingpin that he didn't see Dr. Winkler, who has a gun to Gwen's head. One false move, Spider-Man, he says, and she dies. However, Norman Osborn has come downstairs, hearing commotion in his offices above, and he tackles the Doctor. But his rescue makes things worse as Dr. Winkler lets off a gunshot that explodes the brainwashing machine, killing the Doctor, and leads to a cable above Gwen and George snapping. That large vat is going to crush them. Using all of his speed, Spidey swings to the rescue, scooping up father and daughter in the nick of time. But in the commotion, Kingpin flees in Osborn's private helicopter, too far away for Spider-Man to reach it with his webbing. As Spidey watches from the shadows, he sees George Stacy come back to his regular mind once more, and Norman Osborn is able to explain what happened, exonerating the Echh captain. And Gwen, she wants to thank Spider-Man for rescuing them, unaware that she currently hates his alter ego, her boyfriend, Peter Parker. As he mops the floor, Irving Forbrust laments that no one understands his life as a superhero. What he needs is a superhero gang, and luckily for him, 3 groups are looking for new members, and so he sneaks out and falls right into a bin in the alley, right where he left his costume. 2.5 hours of searching and 1 Spidey cameo later, and he is on his way. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is not Brand Echh issue 8. What price, Forbushman? Forbushman's first stop is to the Revengers, and they're meeting Dang the Conqueror. Dang has historical people to meet, so he challenges 1 Revenger only to a battle to the death in about half an hour. None of the Revengers want to volunteer, but lucky for them, that's when Forbushman turns up, wanting to join, and so they accept him and send him off to fight Dang. Dang uses a mace borrowed from Attila the Hun to bash Forbushman over the head, and then he ships our hero into a time machine set for the dawn of time. Stranded in the Stone Age and attacked by thrown rocks, Forbushman fiddles with the controls until he's finally able to get the machine to return him to the present, where the Revengers are fighting Dang in his honor, inspired by their new ally's sacrifice. With the battle won, the Revengers invite Forbushman into their ranks, but they accidentally activate the time machine, now set for eternity, and so they're blasted off into the time stream before they're able to sign any official paperwork. Forbushman is lonely once more, and so he decides to try Sheesh next, the funny version of S.H.I.E.L.D. After he convinces them that he's not a spy, he's tasked with learning the truth about a suspicious laundrette. Inside, Forbushman witnesses Doctor Doom dive into a washing machine, but before he can get too suspicious, a beautiful woman comes out to flirt with him. Several kisses later, and Forbushman comes out of the laundrette and reports that there was nothing suspicious about it at all. Nock Furious refuses to believe him and hides in a sack, ordering Forbushman to drag him inside the laundrette. As Forbushman is wooed by the attractive woman, Nock dives into a washing machine, beats up the criminal gang inside who are doing the washing for villains, and then reveals that Forbush's suitor is in fact the mastermind behind the scenes. Distraught that his first love was a lie, Forbushman stumbles back into a light switch, and in the darkness the villains get away. Forbushman is not invited back. The last group to try are the X-Men, who are busy fighting and losing in the dangerous room. They need somebody who can make the room less dangerous and sign up Forbushman straight away when he comes knocking. After all, they only have 4 pages left to get to the story. But just as Forbushman joins, the group is attacked by Magneto, a joke that doesn't really work when I say it out loud, and his group of mutants. By tripping at the right time, Forbushman defeats Magneto and Toadstool. When the Scarlet Wench tries to hex our hero, it reflects off of his pan hat, and she accidentally turns Magneto into a duck, and herself into an old lady, and Toadstool into a tortoise. With the villains defeated, there's just one more job, the aforementioned safety of the dangerous room. But since Forbushman knows nothing about how this all works, he ends up making it a much more dangerous room and is promptly fired. Dejected and lonely once more, Forbushman wanders into an alley, where he's invited to join one last group. He turns them down without even looking, unaware that he has rejected the Beatles. Something has sliced through Spider-Man's web and he is falling. The culprit is Medusa of the Inhumans, flying around on a monocruiser. She rescues Spidey with her long red hair and explains that she's here to see if humans still fear the Inhumans, or if they can safely return. But since a costumed hero isn't a regular person, she flies away to do a census with someone else, so fast that Spider-Man loses her. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is Amazing Spider-Man issue 62, Make Way for Medusa. As Medusa flies through the city, she is spotted by Wilberforce and Mr. Bliss, 2 employees at the Heavenly Hairspray Company who are looking for a new model to lead their ad campaign, and they just found her. As they discuss how to approach the Inhuman, Medusa is elsewhere, and she descends into a crowd to see how they respond to her. What starts as fear soon grows calm and accepting when she rescues a boy from falling. Perhaps it is time for the Inhumans to come out of hiding. As Medusa ponders this, Wilberforce gets her attention and offers her money to be the face of their hairspray brand. She has no need for money, but she agrees to get that rare opportunity to study humans up close. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Peter Parker visits Gwen to apologize for attacking her dad, but Gwen is still mad and won't let him explain, and she slams the door in his face. George Stacy, bedbound after the events of the last few issues, is confused. He thought that she still had feelings for the boy, and he doesn't remember what he did while under the Kingpin's control. It's all dim and clouded. And elsewhere once more, J. Jonah Jameson is in the Gentleman's Club, complaining about his staff when Norman Osborn yells at him and flees. Something is bothering Norman, and that something is the memories of the Green Goblin, memories that are becoming clearer and clearer, including the face of an unmasked Spider-Man. But before we can worry about that, we visit his son, Harry Osborn, who is struggling with his studying and jealous of how easy everything comes to Peter, the brewing of something very important. The next day, Medusa is shooting her ad campaign and she is bored. So bored that she just trashes the studio and leaves, vowing to never return. But no one does that to Montgomery G. Bliss. He vows to get $1 million of publicity out of Medusa, which would be $9 million today, inflation fans. And when he spots Spidey swinging past, he knows just how he's going to do that. He yells for help out of the window, and Spider-Man arrives to find Mr. Bliss in the middle of a trashed studio. Bliss says that Medusa did it, and that she threatened to do worse. And even though Spidey doesn't think his story holds up, he swings away to confront Medusa. If he can stop her, he can ask questions later. And Mr. Bliss arranges for a whole bunch of cameras to be on the scene of the fight. When Spider-Man catches up with Medusa, he does try to talk to her, unlike every other time he fights a superhero, and he asks for an explanation. But she explains nothing to anyone, and she responds with violence. The two tussle right in front of a billboard for Heavenly Hairspray, and Medusa wraps Spidey up with her hair. Spidey breaks out, and again he tries to talk to her. He's willing to listen to her side of the story. Willing? Medusa yells. Medusa decides who will listen to her and when, and she meets him once more with violence. Spidey tackles her and gets thrown into a wall, and then he wraps her in webbing and she starts to cut her way out with her hair, but she isn't cutting her way out to attack once more. Instead, Spider-Man has made it very clear that Inhumans are unwelcome, and she will return to her people and tell them to stay in hiding. But now there's a moment when she's still entangled in webbing where Spidey can finally have a moment to talk to her, and he realizes that he's been lied to, and Medusa realizes that she's been betrayed. But Spider-Man has a plan that will get back at Mr. Bliss, and Medusa, not knowing who to trust anymore, leaves him to it. A short time later, Mr. Bliss learns that the sales of Heavenly Hairspray have plummeted. Apparently, Spider-Man had told reporters that Medusa was wild and uncontrollable, the exact opposite of how people would want their hair, and so people don't buy it anymore. But elsewhere, Peter Parker doesn't care about Hairspray. He misses Gwen, the one girl he cares about. Even when MJ arrives, cheering the news that Peter and Gwen have split, meaning that he can be with her, Peter is just not in the mood. It seems, Mary Jane thinks, like he really misses the girl. A man named Richard Riley is running for mayor of New York and has billboards plastered everywhere. But the man has enemies, and when Spider-Man swings past one of his billboards, a 10-foot man smashes through it and sends two painters plummeting down to earth. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is Spectacular Spider-Man issue 1, Lo, This Monster. Spider-Man is able to catch the painters and do battle with the large monster, but the monster is quicker than he looks, can climb walls by digging his hands in, and is very, very strong. Even though Spidey can dodge him, the monster is throwing rubble that will crush the people below, and Spider-Man's attention turns to that instead, slowing it down with his webbing. His attention is then drawn to the two painters from before, and he saves them from falling from the ledge that he placed them on. By the time he turns back to the monster, the 10-foot man is gone, which is probably good, because Spider-Man was down to his last web cartridge. Back as Peter and on his way to the Bugle, our hero is stopped by Harry and MJ. They give him a button in support of Riley, and they're both huge fans. They even invite Peter to a big dance held in Riley's honor. At the Bugle, J. Jonah Jameson is also a fan of Riley and is backing the politician with his newspaper. And Betty Brant is a fan too and urges Peter to watch a speech by him. And so Peter does, gathering with the others around a TV. In the speech, Riley is angry. This monster that attacked was a declaration of war from the underworld against law and order. And Richard Riley will stand against them no matter what it takes. The more they attack him, the harder he'll fight back. But elsewhere, backstage after the speech, Riley is much less composed. He's ranting and raving about all the sheep blindly following him and how soon he'll have true power. The next day, Peter arrives at Gwen's house to take her to the dance. There, they're met by Mary Jane as an usher and guided to their seats to listen to J. Jonah Jameson give a long meandering speech. But it finally ends and Peter and Gwen can finally dance with each other, except Peter's spider sense goes off. He notices that the light fixture above them is beginning to crack and will come down on everybody. With no time to change, Peter rips out a power panel to switch off all the lights and climbs the wall in his civilian garb. People spot him but can't see who it is, and Peter's able to web up the fixture and create a shield to hide his identity before the crowd below can locate a flashlight. Spider-Man has saved the day, unless you ask Jonah, who is convinced that Spidey was trying to kill them all. And Peter's secret remains, even when Gwen finds web on his suit. After all, web fell on everybody there. Elsewhere, Richard Riley hears the news about the dance and he's mad? It turns out that he was the one that arranged for the roof to cave in to make it look like the underworld was out to get him. And also, in a secret basement, he has that 10-foot monster man from the beginning of the story. He'd commissioned a scientist to modify a common thug and sent him on an anti-Riley rampage to drum up sympathy. After losing to Spider-Man, Riley's requested further modifications. Now the monster has increased strength and a remote control to command it. It's the perfect weapon in case Spider-Man continues to be a bother. The next day, the day after the dance, J. Jonah Jameson is extolling the virtues of Riley at the Gentleman's Club. Captain Stacy is less convinced. There's something off about the guy. Jonah will be interviewing Riley soon, and he encourages Stacy to join him to see who he really is. But Captain Stacy thinks he'll get more out of the records, detailing the potential mayor's past. Facts, yells Jonah. Who needs facts when the vibe is right? And so he goes to interview Riley and casually mentions how his silly friend is doing some silly research into Riley's past. But a man of character like Riley has nothing to fear, right? But after the interview, with everything to fear, Riley activates his monster, giving it a simple command: kill Captain Stacy. Elsewhere and later, Peter is about to drive Gwen away on a date when the monster arrives ready to fulfill its mission. Peter's able to get Gwen to go and call the police while he becomes Spider-Man and he swings to the rescue. He's able to knock the monster down and hold the monster back long enough for Captain Stacy to get away, and learns in the process that the monster is following some kind of order. Spider-Man then angers the monster enough that it forgets its mission and focuses only on chasing Spidey. The monster climbs up the wall after him, grabbing handfuls of bricks to pull himself up, and chases our hero across the city. But when they arrive at a poster for Riley's campaign, the monster freezes, just for a moment, and it gives Spider-Man an idea. Spider-Man lets the monster chase him, all the way to the home of Richard Riley, where he spots a control device in Riley's hand, a device he uses when the monster arrives. Spider-Man confirms his suspicion. Riley is controlling the monster. But Riley is using the controller too much, trying to have too much power over his monster, and the safety guard short circuits. The monster is free of Riley's control and it kills Riley with one blow. And now, with his master dead, he wants to go on a crime rampage across the city. Meanwhile and elsewhere, J. Jonah Jameson hears about the monster attack and races across town to Riley's house for the story of the century. Before he can get there, Spider-Man is keeping the monster still, stopping it from entering the city. He's delivering punches and avoiding them in return, but he's getting tired, and the monster isn't. Spider-Man figures that the control chip, while deactivated, is probably the monster's weak spot, and he puts his all into one last punch to the neck. And it works. The The monster falls down, dead. As Spider-Man flees the scene at the sound of sirens, the police and Jonah take in the scene before them. It seems that the monster and Spider-Man have attacked Riley and crushed him under rubble. Jonah is shocked, adamant that, even in death, Richard Riley's fearlessness shone like a beacon. And to prove it, Jonah's going to write the greatest editorial of his career. And of course, he's going to blame Spider-Man. Peter Parker is at the funeral of Uncle Ben, convinced that he was the one that killed him. As he walks Aunt May out of the rain, he reminisces about the events that led to his uncle's death. Events that are subtly different to his original origin. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is Spectacular Spider-Man issue 1, In the Beginning. The story starts the same. Young Peter is a nerd who attends a science exhibition. A spider is irradiated and, in its dying breath, it bites Peter. Feeling dizzy, Peter steps outside. This time, however, Peter is walking in a daze, and he bumps into a man. The man punches Peter, a punch that he barely feels, and Peter responds with a punch that breaks a lamppost. What is happening to him? Then, like the origin, he leaps out the way of a car, he climbs a building, he walks down a wire, invents web shooters, and now he's Spider-Man. Wanting to show off, he swings to the nearest TV studio and arrives just as a crime is happening. A robber is getting away, and Spider-Man doesn't stop him. It ain't his problem. Instead, he auditions for a TV show and is successful. But when he returns home, a police car is outside. His uncle has been shot. Quickly changing, he chases after the killer as Spider-Man, bursting into a warehouse and knocking the criminal down. But when he sees the face of the man who killed his uncle, he's shocked to find that it's the same man that he let escape. It was his problem all along. And so Peter stands mournful on a dock, vowing to never shirk his duty again. The Vulture is back. You know, the one that died way back in issue 48. He's alive and he's angry, and he breaks into a museum to steal back the wings that were stolen from him by his ex-cellmate Blackie Drago. And what's Spider-Man doing during all of this? He's out in the heavy rain, and his web is unable to stick to anything because of it, and he's slipping and falling hard onto a building below, injuring his shoulder. And so when he sees the Vulture flying away, he's sure that the pain must be making him delirious. After all, the Vulture's dead. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is Amazing Spider-Man issue 63, Wings in the Night. Spider-Man is finally able to make it home, going to bed in his costume because his shoulder makes it impossible to change. The pain causes a fitful sleep, filled with dreams about Gwen and the moment he struck her father. At college the next day, and still in pain, Peter is blanked by Gwen, who is still hurting. In class, he has to sit beside her, as she won't even look at him. How could she put him out of her mind so quickly? But inside of Gwen's mind, she just wants Peter to say anything at all, and she'd forgive him. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Blackie Drago is being harassed in the prison yard when the Vulture swoops down his betrayed pal, Adrian Toomes. But Toomes doesn't want revenge. He wants Drago to put on a second Vulture outfit, and they both make an aerial escape from the prison. Back with Peter, and he's with his roommate Harry and still nursing his shoulder when a letter comes through from Flash Thompson. It seems that Flash is heading to Vietnam, and the thought of war and a joke about Peter's will leaves Peter thinking about his secret, about how nobody knows that he's Spider-Man, and that he should probably tell somebody. The thought leads him to try Gwen on the phone, and he gets her father instead. Old George Stacy has been meaning to speak to Peter and invites him for lunch the next day. As Peter hangs up, there's a knock at the door. It's Norman Osborn, who is grumpy and ill-tempered because every time he sees Peter, all he can think about is the Green Goblin and Spider-Man. And that is a bad sign for Peter Parker. Elsewhere, high above New York, Adrian Toomes explains how he still lives. You see, when Blackie Drago revealed his betrayal, Toomes' need for revenge grew stronger than his illness, and he snuck out in a guard's costume as people focused on Drago's escape. And now, with Drago in a Vulture costume, Toomes is going to defeat him in front of everybody and let all of New York know who the strongest Vulture is. And so, they fight. The fight is witnessed on the street below by Peter Parker. He'd be no good in a fight, not with his busted shoulder, and so he hopes that the two villains deal with one another. Instead, he goes into the Bugle, where J. Jonah Jameson instantly drags Peter to the roof to photograph the fight. It seems that Peter Parker will be getting involved after all. As Peter is taking photos of the two vultures, the fight gets too close to a balcony across the street, and a young boy is left stranded and hanging as the balcony is split in two. Peter can't ignore the fight now, and he ducks away to become Spider-Man and swings to the boy's rescue. The boy is safe and with his mother. Jonah is angry that he doesn't have a photographer. Blackie Drago is defeated in front of everybody and vows never to wear the wings again. And Spider-Man is now facing the superior Vulture, and his arm has gone numb. How will he battle the Vulture now? Marvel Comics have done it again. They found a public domain story that isn't copyrighted, so they don't have to keep making up their own. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is not Brand Echh issue 9. Arch and the Teenstalk. Archie Android is chilling at home, casually stabbing a comic of his rival when his mother, Mendoozy, tells him to sell Lumpjaw, their magic dog, so they can get a happily ever after. And so he does, to Doctor Strange for a bag of jumping beans. He races home to show his mother, but Mendoozy is mad and she slips in her rage and the beans go out of the window. The next morning, Arch sees a giant beanstalk outside, grown from the beans. He climbs up it, knocking down Kazoo and Spidey-Man on the way, and reaches limbo in the clouds. Up there he finds a giant's castle with an Elvis singing harp and Donald Duck laying golden eggs. But before he can steal them, to secure his happily ever after, he hears a noise and he hides in an oven just in time to avoid the arrival of Frankenstein, who is living off his residuals from all those movies that he starred in. When Frankenstein falls asleep, Arch steals Donald Duck and a bag of money. Then, at Donald's request, he goes back to steal the harp. The harp begins yelling that he's all shook up and awakens Frankenstein. Chased by the monster, Arch races down the beanstalk, knocking Kazoo and Spidey-Man off again, and uses Elvis's pipes to cut the beanstalk in two. Frankenstein crashes to the ground, revealing that he was a robot all along, piloted by Plughead, Arch's buddy, who was tired of getting second billing all the time. But Arch still has all his treasure and can live happily ever after, until the police jump out of a bin and arrest him for theft. Spider-Man is injured and the Vulture is swooping down on him. The city is watching, including J. Jonah Jameson, who has another photographer thanks to Robbie Robertson. Is this the end of Spider-Man? We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is the Amazing Spider-Man issue 64, The Vulture's Prey. As the Vulture swoops down, Spidey responds with a kick, a move that doesn't require him to use his injured shoulder. But Vulture recovers, and with his own kick he takes out chunks of the chimney that Spider-Man was resting on. But Spider-Man's gone, hiding on the other side of the chimney to grab at the Vulture when he gets close and web up his legs. But Spider-Man's arm is still weak and he's pulled away from the wall and towards the watching journalists. Spidey yells for Jonah and Robbie to get out of the way, and Robbie, just for a brief moment, questions whether Spider-Man is someone they know, before Spider-Man is swung towards them by the Vulture. Spidey is able to land safely on a billboard, but Vulture slams down towards him. Even though Spider-Man can dodge, bricks fall, Jonah freezes, and Robbie is crushed when he jumps to push Jonah out of the way. Robbie's alive still, thankfully, but injured. And Jonah is mad, blaming Spider-Man for the accident. When the Vulture swoops down again, Jonah grabs hold of Spider-Man, offering him to the villain. But Spider-Man is able to flip them both out of harm's way and web up Jonah to keep him from doing more harm. But the Vulture just won't quit. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Mary Jane visits Aunt Anna and Aunt May, sporting a brand new haircut. May is worried that she hasn't heard from Peter, and gets even more worried when she learns that Mary Jane hasn't heard from him either. And elsewhere once more, and George Stacy surprises his daughter. He's out of bed and well again. And he also has his memory back, and he's able to tell Gwen that Peter never attacked him, that Peter was just trying to help and didn't betray them at all. Gwen is so happy, but her joy turns to worry when they arrive at the Bugle building, the site of the Vulture fight, and Betty tells her that Peter was on the roof. And up on that very roof, and Spider-Man continues his fight with the Vulture. He delivers a powerful punch, but it does little, and Vulture knocks Spider-Man down to the side of the building. Spider-Man reaches out to grab the Vulture's legs, but he's weak and he's injured, and he's unable to hold on. With a punch, the Vulture sends Spider-Man falling down to the streets below. Spider-Man at the last moment is able to web up a cushion to protect himself from the fall, but when the Vulture comes to check on his prey, Spider-Man seems unconscious. That is, until the Vulture gets close enough, and then Spidey jumps up and snaps the power pack in Vulture's wings. The Vulture's power is draining, and he flees, keen not to be caught. Spider-Man has won, kind of, but Spider-Man is weary, and he's weak. And even though he'd be at the mercy of the gathering crowd, he passes out, actually unconscious this time. Daredevil is exercising and thinking about Karen Page, his lost love. We see in a flashback that she quit as Matt Murdock's receptionist because she loves Matt, but he won't get close to her because of his blindness. But she doesn't know the real Daredevil-shaped reason that he can't get close to her. And so, to make her departure easier, Matt insults her and acts like a cad, upsetting her and distancing them both. Now he's lost the love of his life, and Daredevil doesn't know what to do. We're reading Every Spider-Man Ever, and this is Daredevil issue 43, In Combat with Captain America. To get his mind off Karen, Daredevil swings out into the streets of New York. He sees that Captain America is participating in a charity fight, and Daredevil briefly considers joining him as a contender when he overhears a police radio. Some radioactive vials have been stolen, but lucky for Daredevil, he got his powers via radiation, and so he can sense it. He quickly finds the thief and recovers the vials, but suddenly his head starts to spin. The radioactivity seems to be affecting him. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Captain America is about to start his charity fight. It's only for show, and Cap's opponent is happy that it's not for real, when suddenly Daredevil swoops in, knocks this opponent down, and takes his place. The fight will be real, Daredevil cries. Daredevil swings at Cap, uncharacteristically angry, and Cap takes the blows before blocking with his shield. Cap doesn't believe this is the real Daredevil. Our hero would never usually act like this, and so he's shocked at Daredevil's brutal speed and gets sucker punched. The fight spills out of the ring and into an elevator shaft, the whole ordeal being photographed by one Peter Parker, who surprisingly has no interest in getting involved. As the two heroes fall down the elevator shaft, Daredevil gets a headache, and it's like a veil has been lifted. He has no memory of how he got here or why he's in a fight with Captain America. It must have been the radioactivity, interfering with the radioactivity that he'd already absorbed. Not willing to fight further and embarrassed by his actions, Daredevil flees, and Cap lets him, pretending to the press that this was all a show. And in an alleyway, Daredevil realizes that during the fight, for just a brief moment, he had forgotten about Karen Page. Spider-Man has fallen and he's unconscious, surrounded by a crowd desperate to unmask him. They're stopped by George Stacy, who won't even let his pal J. Jonah Jameson unmask our hero. While his daughter, Gwen, panics that she can't find Peter anywhere, George follows Spider-Man to the prison infirmary to keep him masked. But at the Bugle, Jonah tells a recovering Robbie that it's only a matter of time before that menace is revealed to the world. We're reading Every Spider-Man Ever, and this is Amazing Spider-Man issue 65, The Impossible Escape. Spider-Man wakes up in a hospital bed, inside of a prison. From the conversation that he overhears, no one is coming to unmask him soon, and so he takes time to recover his strength. Outside of the room, George Stacy is on the phone to Gwen. He tells her not to worry about Peter, that he's probably on some date with another girl. You know, the very kind thing to say to a girl who still very much loves Peter. But as he's about to say he won't be home for dinner, George Stacy is accosted by some escaping prisoners, who take him hostage. They're going to use this old man as leverage to break out of prison. To escape, they head through the room that Spidey is staying in. For a brief moment, Spider-Man considers letting them pass. He's too injured to fight, and one wrong move might kill George Stacy. But he vowed never to let anybody down, and so he steps out of the shadows. He pretends that he wants to join their escape. They don't believe him, and he put a lot of them in jail, and so they attack him, but he easily knocks them away. When they threaten to kill George Stacy, Spider-Man bluffs. Why would he care if they kill an old man? And thankfully, they believe him, and Spidey's recruited in the escape attempt. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Harry Osborn is looking for his father. Norman was feeling unwell, driven mad by mentions of the Green Goblin and Spider-Man, and has vanished. Harry bumps into Jonah, who is looking for Peter. Neither man can help the other, and so they go their separate ways, with Harry blanking MJ on his way out too. Back in prison, and Spider-Man is leading the escape attempt. He's outnumbered and unable to make a move. All it takes is for one guy left standing, and George Stacy is a goner. And so Spider-Man bends some bars and escapes out into the prison yard, promising to meet the inmates later. His plan is to take out the men one by one, and so he breaks into the prison office, webs up the warden because it would take too long to explain, calls Aunt May for some reason, which is a terrible mistake and only makes her worry more about Peter, and then finally pulls out the fuses, plunging the whole prison into darkness. Spider-Man rejoins the convicts, and in the dark, he takes them out one or two at a time, without any of the others noticing. Unfortunately, before he can subdue the final man holding Captain Stacy, the emergency floodlights come on, and the prisoner sees that all his buddies are in webs. Acting quickly, Spider-Man yells for Captain Stacy to lean forward, and he shoots the convict with webbing. As the convict's hands go up to his webbed face, Spider-Man follows with a punch. The escape attempt is thwarted. George Stacy thanks our hero. He knew that Spider-Man would never turn bad. But when he asks Spider-Man to wait around so that they can clear his name, Spidey bends the bars once again and leaves. He can't risk his face being revealed, not with Aunt May's help. Instead, only George Stacy remains when the police finally get there, and he has to listen to Jonah rant about that web crawler getting away yet again. And Spidey, well, he really needs to see his Aunt May soon. But what is he even going to say to her? It's been a while since we've seen the Avengers, and they're now made up of Captain America, Hawkeye, Black Panther, Goliath, and the Wasp. And they have returned from the past. But something is not quite right. When they arrive back at Avengers Mansion, featuring furniture that they're sure they threw away, they discover a different set of Avengers in their place. Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, Ant-Man, and the Wasp still. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is the Avengers Annual Issue 2, and Time the Rushing River. And The Avengers Must Die. It's in 2 parts. With neither the new or old Avengers willing to explain themselves, they fight each other because, of course. But the old Avengers are powerhouses and are winning, and so Goliath slams some machinery into the ground, and Hawkeye activates smoke, and our new Avengers flee into underground tunnels. They quickly put together that their time travel went awry somewhere, and that the Avengers they just fought were the Avengers that would have been if Cap had never joined. Something in history has changed, and so they're going to have to discover what it is. Meanwhile, on the surface, the old Avengers summon a mysterious figure, the Scarlet Centurion. It seems that the Centurion warned the old Avengers about the arrival of the new Avengers, and he's angry that even with the warning, the old Avengers were unable to deal with the problem. He demands that they destroy these new Avengers. Elsewhere and later, our old Avengers are breaking into a facility that contains a device that has all of recorded history within it. They strap Captain America in, and he's suddenly able to witness any part of history he wants. He's taken back to the day that the Hulk originally left the Avengers. But instead of leaving, the Scarlet Centurion appears from the future and promises the Avengers the cure for poverty and hunger if they just follow his instructions. And so, since they're not fans of poverty or hunger, the Avengers do, wiping out any being with superpowers, which means destroying the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, the X-Men, Doctor Strange, Daredevil, and more. Then they ban all scientific inquiry, just in case it accidentally leads to a superhero, which is very likely in the Marvel world. The Scarlet Centurion congratulates them. They have saved the world. They just have to watch out for one more thing, some Avengers arriving at some point in the future. The fight that we've just seen. Cap removes the helmet from his head and explains the situation to the others. It seems the only fix, the only way to get the world back to how it was, is time travel. And Doctor Doom's time travel device is split into 3 parts. And so that's what they're going to need to find. And so Hawkeye and Black Panther battle Iron Man and the Hulk to get the first part. Hawkeye has a metal eroding arrow to take care of the former, and a sonic arrow set to just the right frequency to turn the Hulk back into Banner. Then Captain America fights Thor for the second part of the time machine, and he's able to keep Thor's hammer away from him just long enough to turn Thor back into Donald Blake, an ordinary human who can be knocked out by Cap. And lastly, Goliath and the Wasp fight themselves to get the third part. And they're able to win because they know themselves and they know their weaknesses. And so, all the pieces have been gathered. But before they can activate the time machine, the Scarlet Centurion appears and attacks. He freezes Cap in a block of ice, blinds Black Panther, and explodes Hawkeye. But he doesn't notice Goliath shrinking down and activating Doom's time machine. The machine is able to correct the past, and as it does, the dying Avengers begin to fade away. After all, they don't exist anymore. As they die, they are visited by the Watcher, who tells them that they won't remember any of this. And he's right. Our heroes awaken, newly back from the past, and everything is exactly as they left it. Aliens have come down to Earth while the Inferior Five are busy fighting a monster. And by monster, we mean a water hose that took them hours to flatten. We're reading Every Spider-Man Ever, and this is Inferior 5 Issue 10, A Monster Rally. The Inferior Five have been failing a lot recently, electrocuting themselves while rescuing cats, sinking ships by crashing through the hull, and spending their archery talents shooting holes in donuts. So they vow to get better. They're in the middle of the training when a call goes out for all superheroes. An alien invasion is taking place, and so the Inferior Five join Superman and the Submoron and the Kooky Quartet and the Cobweb Kid and head off to save the planet. Before they even have a chance to fight the aliens, the Thing rushes ahead because he's the strongest. He's going to punch the nearest invader, but is hit by their special glare, which makes him sneeze and explode. Eager to help, the Inferior Five glue him back together, getting it wrong again and again and again. Elsewhere in the battle, Namor is dehydrated, his gills drying out. Dumb Bunny points him towards a building with some tanks inside. There must be some liquid in there, and the Submoron races inside, but the tanks were filled with whiskey. And Namor is quickly inebriated, falling flat on his face when he tries to leave. And elsewhere again, the Matchstick Kid, or the Human Torch to you and me, is given the evil eye by an alien, and his flame is switched off. No matter how hard he tries, he can't flame on, and so the Inferior Five race him to a tobacco shop to get him relit. Meanwhile, the Cobweb Kid, who looks an awful lot like Spider-Man, is getting frustrated with the Inferior Five for getting in the way all of the time. When they end up accidentally knocking him over, an alien gives him the evil eye, and he reverts to being a spider, chasing flies up a wall. Soon the Inferior Five are surrounded, and then mind-controlled by the aliens, frozen to the spot as the aliens take over. But fortunately for the world, Superman arrives. He flies past the scene so fast that he sucks up all the aliens into the air and deposits them back into their ship, which he hurls into space. And then he flies away, and no one knows that he helped. As the Inferior Five are still frozen, they're berated by the public for just standing around while aliens attacked. But then, they unfreeze, and decide to head to the malt shop to celebrate, unaware that all the heroes that they unsuccessfully tried to help are waiting around the corner to tar and feather them. Peter Parker is attending a presentation about Spider-Man, hosted by George Stacy and featuring photographs that were physically impossible to take. And Norman Osborn is also there and not having a very good time. He can't look at the Green Goblin or Spider-Man without sweating, and only Peter knows why. It's because Norman was the Green Goblin, and he also knew that Peter was Spider-Man until he got amnesia. But now it all seems to be coming back, and as Norman tries to make sense of these re-emerging memories, he collapses, and Peter is worried. We're reading Every Spider-Man Ever, and this is the Spectacular Spider-Man Issue 2, The Goblin Lives. And the Goblin does indeed live, as Norman lays sweating in a hospital bed, and all his long-forgotten memories swirl together and finally make sense. He is the Goblin. And so he leaps out of bed, barrels past Harry and a doctor, knocking them aside as if they were puppets, and races to a secret hideaway. Donning his goblin costume, he has one thing on his mind: revenge. Meanwhile and later, Peter Parker also has one thing on his mind: paranoia. Hearing that Norman fled into the night, he's sure that the Goblin is back, and he can't focus on his studies or on Gwen, and he's jumping at toy planes. At home, he dreams of Aunt May's shock when she learns of his identity, and so he gets out of bed, costumes up, and swings around the city in search of the Goblin. But he finds nothing, unaware that Norman is following him from a distance, just biding his time. Elsewhere and later, Norman returns home to Harry, claiming to be better now. In fact, he's feeling so good that he wants to hold a dinner party and invite that Parker kid, along with Gwen and Mary Jane. Peter knows it's a trap. It's obviously a trap, but he can do nothing but go. And so he picks up Gwen, who looks incredible, and he hints that he'd love to marry her, but he can't get sidetracked from worrying about Norman. They both arrive at the party, and Norman greets them with a powerful handshake, strong enough to break fingers. It's a sign to Peter that he remembers. They all sit down to eat, and Norman Osborn probes Peter about his life, darkly joking that Peter must have some secrets. As the night goes on, it's clear that Norman is losing his discipline, and may just attack Peter in front of his friends. And so Peter asks to make a phone call. And while he's away from the group, he throws a ball of webbing into the fireplace. As he dances with Gwen in the other room, the ball begins to burn, flooding the house with smoke. Peter yells at Harry to get Gwen and MJ out, and he'll focus on Norman. But Norman has no interest in fighting in the smoke. Instead, he loudly declares that he's going to go after Peter's Aunt May, and then ducks away to become the Green Goblin. Peter, now dressed as Spider-Man, catches up with the Goblin in the streets and is immediately attacked by the Goblin's glider, now equipped with new weapons. Spidey's able to dodge for just a moment, but is eventually shocked by a Goblin blast and knocked down. Instead of getting back up, Spider-Man plays possum, letting Goblin come close enough to hit him with a big punch. But what can he do now? He can't kill the Green Goblin, and nothing less than that will stop Norman from revealing his secret identity. With nothing left to do, he decides to lure the Goblin away from his aunt, and he runs away. The Green Goblin is angry and throws a new bomb at Spider-Man that leaks an hallucinogenic gas. Spidey is suddenly seeing ghosts and monsters and the people in his life and the enemies he's fought, and he's so tiny against them, so small and so weak, so he closes his eyes. Uses his brain to understand that this isn't real, that it can't be real, and when he opens them again, the ghosts and the mirages are gone. But now he knows how to beat the Green Goblin. Suddenly on the offensive, Spidey pulls the glider out from under the Goblin. Spidey's quick to dodge and quick to punch, and all the time he's mocking the Goblin. He didn't think that he'd be able to take on Spider-Man, and the Goblin is getting angry and getting careless. And soon Spider-Man has the Goblin down at his feet. He takes off the Goblin mask, revealing Norman underneath, and uses one of the hallucinogenic bombs against him. The gas drives Norman mad, conjuring monsters in his mind, and Spider-Man is sure to keep himself and the Goblin mask front and center of Norman's vision, so that he develops a fear and an aversion to both. When the gas finally wears off, Norman doesn't remember who Spider-Man is, and so it seems that the plan has worked. Peter delivers Norman, now sleeping, back to the hospital. He then calls his aunt to tell her late at night that he's fine, even though she didn't know that he wasn't. When he realizes this, he quickly makes out that he was talking about Norman all along. Norman is fine. And then our story comes to a close, as Harry joins his father's bedside, and Peter takes Gwen and MJ out for some coffee and some ice cream at like 6 in the morning. Mysterio is talking to himself about his model fairground and his helmet with psychedelic powers, and how he'll be using both to teach Spider-Man a lesson. He then explains to himself how he escaped from prison using drugs from the pharmacy to create smoke and escaping on top of a bus. And now that he's free, he'll commission a crime colourful enough to draw the attention of Spider-Man so that he can finally destroy the web slinger. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is Amazing Spider-Man issue 66, The Madness of Mysterio. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Peter Parker is returning to the scene of his fight with the Vulture to recover his clothes and his camera. He's worried about Jonah, who thinks Peter ran away, and he's worried about Gwen, who still isn't speaking to him, and he's worried about Aunt May, who he hasn't seen for days, and he's worried about Norman Osborn, who could become the Green Goblin at any time, although if you were here last week you know that he already did. And to make matters worse, Peter's shirt was torn in the fight. Peter decides to tackle his Jonah worry first, and he goes to the Bugle to sell his pictures of the Vulture. But Jonah doesn't need Peter the coward. He had a star photographer take pictures of the fight, and so Jonah kicks Peter out and then is distraught to learn that the star photographer was scared and shaking, and all the photographs are unusable. And Peter, unaware of Jonah's change of mind, sells his motorcycle to get some money. All of a sudden, out of some smoke, Mysterio appears on the street. He makes a big fuss, drawing attention to himself, before disappearing once again in smoke. But Peter can sense him still, using his spider sense, but he decides to let the police handle it. It's not like anyone is in trouble, and it seems that he's the one that gets in trouble every time he chases these villains, and so he doesn't notice that Mysterio is under his feet in the sewers, annoyed that Spider-Man hasn't shown. Peter's next worry is soon dismissed when Gwen Stacy finds him and explains that her dad remembered everything. They both declare their love for each other, they hug, and then they head to a cafe where they can stare into each other's eyes. And elsewhere across town, George Stacy is meeting with Robbie Robertson for lunch. The two of them have a very special interest in Spider-Man, and they're starting to suspect that they might know him in some way. Later, after unsuccessfully helping Harry look for his father, Peter decides to pay May a visit, the last of his 4 worries. But as he gets close to the door, he hears his aunt cry out in alarm. Concerned for her safety, he smashes down the door to find that she's just shocked by the TV. Mysterio is on the news, using effects to make it look like he's destroying a bridge, and promising to do it for real if Spider-Man doesn't show at the place they first met. Aunt May all but faints at the idea that men like Mysterio and Spider-Man even exist, so Peter leaves her on the sofa and races away, and I guess leaves the door broken? As Spider-Man, he swings to that warehouse that he first met Mysterio and rips open the door, the second door that he breaks this issue. Inside, he finds Mysterio, who mocks Spidey and then vanishes into some smoke. Smoke that disables Spider-Man's spider sense, enough for Mysterio to get some punches in. When Spidey leaps free of the smoke, Mysterio points to his model fairground, the site of Spidey's demise apparently, and then shoots our hero with some kind of laser gun. Spider-Man dodges the blast because that's what he does, but the laser gets close enough and Spidey falls down dizzy, feeling like he's falling towards the model fairground. When he comes to, he's surrounded by a full-size fairground and a giant Mysterio, who informs Spidey that he's been shrunk to just 6 inches high. Spider-Man is in Algeria and his spider sense goes off. He waits until the last moment and then he dodges a knife thrown at him. He's suddenly surrounded by half a dozen men, all eager to take him out, but they've underestimated the amazing Spider-Man. He leaps over watermelon carts, whips guns into faces, and springboards into clueless henchmen. Now knowing they're outmatched, the men flee. Spider-Man chases after them across the rooftops, but a bullet fires close to his head, and he twists to dodge it and falls down off the building and into the water. He doesn't resurface, and the men go to report his defeat to their master. We're reading Every Spider-Man Ever, and this is Amazing Spider-Man Annual Issue 5, The Parents of Peter Parker. Spider-Man is alive, just about, and as he recovers on the riverside, he remembers how he got in this situation in the first place. A few days ago, he was helping his Aunt May move some things into the basement when he slipped and his spider strength opened one of the chests. While tidying the mess, he found a press clipping about his parents, about their death, that revealed a terrible truth. They were traitors to their country. Peter confronts Aunt May about it, and she confirms the story in a flashback within the flashback. She remembers how they looked after Peter when he was a baby while his parents travelled for work, and a month later, Peter had aged 5 years and they learned that his parents were traitors. They tried to find out more from a man in Algeria that recognised the bodies but he never responded. And Peter is crestfallen and can't focus during the coming days on his life as Peter Parker or his life as Spider-Man. He needs answers. And so, as Spider-Man, he recruits the help of Mr. Fantastic, who uses a prototype vehicle to whisk them across the Atlantic and drop Spidey in Algeria. Spider-Man eventually finds the man that May and Ben wrote to, the man that knew his parents. Using force, he convinces the man to give him an address for the person that his parents worked for. But his conversation is overheard, and as he heads back out into the streets of Algeria, his spider sense gives a warning. And then, like we saw at the beginning, he fights some folks and almost drowns, and now we're all caught up. Back on his feet, Spidey breaks into the address that he was given and finds a beautifully furnished study. Going through filing cabinets, he finds a folder about Richard Parker, his father, and inside his worst fear is confirmed. A membership card with a skull on it reveals that his father was, in fact, a traitor to the US. And Spider-Man soon learns who his father was working for when he turns around to find the Red Skull. Not only were his parents traitors, but they were working with a Nazi. The Red Skull doesn't have time for Spidey, who is much smaller than Captain America, who he's used to fighting, and so he summons a man named Sandor to defeat the web-slinger. Spider-Man is cocky. After all, Sandor is only human, but he finds himself thrown across the room and into a wall. Changing tactics, our hero webs the brute up, enough to delay him so that he can get a kick in and a punch in and knocks Sandor down. Spidey then limps away, sad about his parents and haunted by the membership card that he found. But his battle with the Red Skull isn't over. The Skull finds a scrap of Spidey's costume and commissions a man called the Finisher to finish Spider-Man for good. The Finisher feeds the scrap of material into a special car, which tracks Spider-Man across Algeria and launches a missile at our hero. Spidey is able to sense the danger and uses his webbing to spin the missile out of the air and slams it down into the water. But the Finisher launches a second missile, a more advanced one that cannot be dispatched as easily as the last. So Spider-Man dives towards and under the car it came from, and the missile takes out the man that fired it. Spider-Man pulls the Finisher from the wreckage and demands to know more about his father and his relationship with the Red Skull. As the Finisher is dying, he explains that Richard Parker was a traitor, but a traitor to the Red Skull, a double agent working for America. When the Red Skull had discovered their betrayal, he called on the Finisher to kill them, which he did by sabotaging a plane the parents were flying in. Then, the Skull planted false evidence so that the world would think that the Parkers were traitors to their country, their legacy besmirched. But the Finisher dies before Spidey can get any real evidence. But now he knows the truth. His parents were heroes, and now Spider-Man is going to prove it. He races back to the Red Skull, dodging the bullets that the Skull's chair fires at him, and confronts the villain about his parents. The Red Skull confirms what the Finisher said, but that's still not proof that Spidey can use. But before he has a chance to delve deeper, the Red Skull reveals a deadly laser on his chest, bragging that he'll kill Spider-Man, just like he killed that liberty-loving Richard Parker. And that was a mistake. Mentioning Spider-Man's father, and our hero tackles the Skull in a rage just as the villain fires. The beam hits a power source instead, blowing the room up and allowing the Red Skull to escape in the fire. Spider-Man is able to swing clear of the building, and then he discovers something curious. The fire had burned some of the membership card, and hidden inside were his father's credentials, proof that he was working with the US government. With this proof of his parents' innocence secured, Spider-Man is happy once more, and we have no idea how he got home. Smiley Stan Lee, Larumping Larry Lieber, and Jazzy John Romita are struggling to think of a plot for the next Spider-Man issue. But lucky for them, Larry eats a green sour ball. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is Amazing Spider-Man Annual Issue 5. Here we go a-plotting. Larry Lieber gives himself heartburn from the green sour ball, and that gives Stan and Johnny an idea. Aunt May will get heartburn, and Peter needs to get some green pills. And then the ball gets stuck in Larry's throat, and the idea expands. Aunt May chokes on the pills. Peter slaps her on the back and breaks her back with his super strength. Now he has to stay to look after her. As Larry Lieber complains about needing help, the story expands further. Peter needs help, and so he hires Dr. Doom in disguise and catches him abusing icebox privileges. When Larry complains that everyone here is nuts, it sparks the finale to the issue. Doctor Doom trapping Spidey with an atomic bomb hidden inside a cashew nut. And they've done it. They've written the next issue. They light cigars and they celebrate. But then Roy Thomas enters the office with pages for the new Avengers story. The Avengers are going to hire a new housekeeper who is actually Doctor Doom in disguise. And so distraught, Stan and Johnny, with a little cameo from Spidey, watch over Larry as he's forced to eat more sour balls. They're not moving from the office until they come up with another plot. It seems that Spider-Man is 6 inches tall, trapped in a model fairground, while a towering Mysterio tries to squash him. Spidey dodges fists and hands before Mysterio disappears into the smoke. But why would he disappear if he had such an advantage? We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is Amazing Spider-Man issue 67, To Squash a Spider. As Mysterio reappears, Spider-Man hides from him inside a hall of mirrors. He's surrounded by reflections of himself as the walls suddenly start to close in. They're going to crush him. And, according to Mysterio, the glass is laced with poison, which would seep into any cut, so simply smashing his way out is not an option. Meanwhile and elsewhere, the Doctor arrives at Aunt May's house, walking past the door that Peter smashed down and left, and checks on May. He advises her not to worry so much, which is universal advice for Aunt May, and that the best thing that she could do is rest, and be visited by her lazy, good-for-nothing nephew. The Doctor really doesn't like Peter. And then we're back with Spider-Man, and he's desperately trying to web up the mirrors and only succeeding in slowing them down. So he uses that time to web up his arms instead into large protective cocoons, allowing him to dive through the mirrors to his freedom without a poisoned cut. Unfortunately for him, he dives straight into deep water and a whirlpool that sucks him downwards. Spidey is able to fight against the flow and bursts up for air, only to be faced by a giant swinging axe. As it swings towards him, he's able to leap backwards just in time, and then uses the axe to pull him up and onto land. But why is Mysterio, who can crush Spidey like a literal spider, throwing so many traps at Spidey? It's like he's afraid to give Spider-Man a chance to catch his breath, or a chance to think. But when Spider-Man is able to break out of the next trap, a lizard that grabs Spidey with his tail, Mysterio hesitates, like he didn't expect Spider-Man to get this far, and that gives our hero time to think. Meanwhile and elsewhere and across the city, Jonah is angry. Mysterio was on television calling out Spider-Man, and he doesn't have anybody reporting on the story. To appease his boss, Robbie calls George Stacy, who tells him that he has no Spidey news, and tells his daughter that he has no Peter news either. Their conversation is interrupted by the arrival of Randy, Robbie's son, who will be starting at ESU soon, where Peter goes to school, but he's having some kind of concern about it. But before we learn where his hang-up is, we return to Spider-Man, who is being attacked by a giant knife. But he has a theory, and he uses the knife to springboard towards giant Mysterio. If he was really this small, then he won't be a threat. But despite that, giant Mysterio disappears. And Spider-Man realizes the truth, that he was never shrunk, that it was all a hypnotic suggestion to make him believe the illusion. And so he heads to the only light in the fairground and finds the wizard behind it all, Mysterio, at a control panel. Despite some tricks in his cloak, Spidey is able to easily defeat the normal-sized Mysterio. He knocks him down, burns his costume, and then leaves him webbed up for the police. As he swings away to safety, he swings over the top of a student demonstration below. But at least that doesn't concern Spidey, right?
The Avengers have all gathered together. The Wasp, Ant-Man, Hawkeye, Thor, Captain America, Iron Man, and the Black Panther. They're all meeting because the Vision wants to join their ranks and become an Avenger. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is the Avengers issue 58. Even an android can cry. If Vision wants to be an Avenger, he needs to be tested, which is why Captain America dives to attack him, but only ends up going through Vision's intangible form. Iron Man follows with a repulsor ray attack, but that too does little when Vision is intangible. And when the Vision is solid again, he lifts Iron Man above his head and throws him at Thor. When Vision is able to go toe-to-toe with Thor without being knocked out, he has proven that he has the physical traits to be an Avenger, and so it's time to vote. Thor notes the many glorious heroes who have joined the Avengers, at least for some time, which includes Spider-Man, who didn't join the Avengers at any time. Should the Vision join these fabled heroes? As they ponder their vote, Captain America wishes they could probe Vision's memory to find out more about his mysterious past. And so the Vision tries, digging deeper than ever before into his past, and learns of his creation at the hands of Ultron, an evil robot, and how he tried to rebel but quickly fell under Ultron's command. But that opens up further memories. This Ultron reminds Hank Pym of an experiment that he worked on, but he can't quite remember what became of it. And so all the Avengers fly to Pym's old lab, which was destroyed the last time they remember, but is now fully fixed and working. And Pym remembers inventing a robot that started calling him Daddy, and then Father, and then wanted to kill his creator like a mechanized Oedipus complex. When Hank Pym tries to shut the robot down, he was hypnotized and told to forget about everything that had happened. Well, that explains why the lab is all fixed up and why Hank Pym can't remember anything. But something is missing. A memory tape for Wonder Man. Iron Man recalls how Wonder Man, or Simon Williams, was a hero who befriended the Avengers only to betray them to Baron Zemo in exchange for medicine to keep him alive. But Wonder Man had a change of heart when he learned Zemo's true intentions and saves the Avengers, dying in the process. They weren't able to save the body, but they were able to save his brain on a memory tape that's now gone missing. But that explains who Vision is. He's a synthezoid created by Ultron with the brain patterns of a murdered man, of Wonder Man. And so they all fly back to Avengers headquarters, where the Avengers announce their news to Vision. He's officially an Avenger. But how can they accept him, says Vision, when he isn't truly human? But is a man less human because of an artificial leg or a transplanted heart? They all have their differences, and so the Vision is welcome. Asking to be excused, the Vision leaves, and quietly and alone, he cries tears of joy.
Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton are filming a remake of King Kong and arrive at a mysterious island. This film will be their big break. They meet the great and glorious guru, Hugh Hefner, who agrees to help them for 50% of the gross. He lowers it to 49% when he sees how pretty Liz Taylor is, but he's eventually convinced to do it for free, for the exposure that the film will bring him. Liz and Richard are looking for a giant ape, King Kong, but Hugh has been on this island for a long time, and if a giant ape existed, he'd know about it. There is no giant ape, but there is a weird giant ape-like shadow that falls across the jungle. We're reading every Spider-Man ever, and this is not Brand Echh, issue 11, King Kong 68. Richard, Liz and Hugh have found the home of King Kong, handily labelled with lots of signs telling them to keep out, and they attempt to lure him out of his home. They offer fame, like Lassie, and then a lifetime supply of bananas, and then a shot at the White House. I mean, they couldn't do worse. When nothing works, Liz steps forward to let Kong know that he'd be in a movie with her. And all of a sudden, the gate swings open and we meet King Kong and his agent, who is 10% as big as Kong. As everyone flees at the sight of the giant ape, Liz learns that Kong is one of her biggest fans, and she does mean biggest. And he agrees to go back to New York with them. And so, in America, King Kong is presented for the world to see on stage, although the cameramen are more interested in Elizabeth Taylor, and a group of monsters think Kong is a has-been. When Kong spots star photographer Peter Pooper taking photographs of him, he reaches a hand out to grab Peter. Kong wants the photos for his press clippings, but Peter needs the money he can get for them to afford a brain operation for his aunt, to find out if she's got one. And so he flees, hoping to find a phone booth so that he can change into Spidey-Man, while King Kong chases after him with Elizabeth Taylor stuck on his head. Her screams for help are heard by the heroes of New York, including the Fantastic Four and the Avengers, and those heroes race to rescue her, but they can do little to stop him and only succeed in frightening him enough that he climbs the Empire State Building. With all of the heroes buzzing around him, King Kong swats at them but can't be moved. But a watchman for the building throws the book at him, literally, and King Kong leaps into the water and swims away. It turns out that the book was the origin of species, and Kong learnt that he was related to humans and wanted to get away before it happened to him. And Spider-Man arrives at the dock, too late to have any effect. Spider-Man is tired, but he has to pose for a sculpture artist, and then he's whisked away to fight the Green Goblin, and he's already 26.7 seconds behind schedule. We're reading Every Spider-Man Ever, and this is not Brand Echh, issue 11. Fame is a cross-eyed blind date with bad breath. A title that's probably longer than the story. Now in colour, Spidey is ready to film Spectacular Spider-Man issue 2, but he can't remember his complicated lines like, hello. The method actor Goblin gets angry and he knocks Spidey down off the building, and Spidey falls 60 stories before hitting the ground hard. But he's got no time to rest or recover because kids want his autograph. Spider-Man eventually flees to a cupboard full of merchandise and hides away from those kids, but the camera crew are on double duty and he's needed once more on set. But Spidey soon wants to quit when he learns that he'll be fighting 20 supervillains. But he can't quit now. He has to change into his civvies and shoot a final scene as Peter Parker. He has Gwen telling him off for standing her up 3 times, and Jonah telling him off for not getting a photo of Reagan eating a hot dog, and Aunt May sad that he left her alone and there wasn't any wrestling on the TV. And Spidey has had enough. He storms away to go join the real world where no one has heard of superheroes before. But even though he's now real, he's dragged away once again by 2 doctors who look like Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, who had stopped being a comedy duo about 15 years before this comic was published. There's a new hero in town, and as he loudly declares to some fur thieves, his name is Yellow Jacket. He cartwheels around the villains and zaps them with stingers. When one of the would-be robbers tries to drive away, before remembering that he doesn't know how to drive, Yellow Jacket finishes the fight with a punch. But when the police arrive and need Yellow Jacket as a witness, he dismisses them. He plays cops and robbers, and someone else can play judge and jury. And so he flees into the night, and the cops don't know whether to shake his hand or punch him in the mouth. We're reading Every Spider-Man Ever, and this is the Avengers issue 59. The name is Yellow Jacket. Please note that this issue contains a scene with an unconsensual kiss. It can be avoided by skipping the chapter titled The Kiss. J. Jonah Jameson is a big fan of Yellow Jacket. It might be because he owns half the fur company that got robbed, or it might be that the new hero is selling papers, but either way, Yellow Jacket is the type of hero that New York needs, unlike Spider-Man, who is hanging outside on a flagpole and mocking Jonah. This scene doesn't really play into the story much, but it's where Spidey appears, and so we've talked about it. Meanwhile, and at Avengers headquarters, Hawkeye, Vision, Black Panther and the Wasp are training, but they have their minds elsewhere, worried about personal issues. The Wasp in particular is worried about the location of her boyfriend, Hank Pym. Their worries are interrupted by the arrival of Yellow Jacket, who was broken in because he wants to be an Avenger, just like Vision last issue. And the Wasp's worry is answered when Yellow Jacket reveals that he killed Hank Pym. The Wasp faints. Yellow Jacket explains that the two of them fought, and that Yellow Jacket was able to blind Hank with a stinger blast. Hank grew too tall, smashed through the building, and knocked himself down, long enough for Yellow Jacket to spray him with a shrinking gas and leave him in the hands of a spider. The Avengers naturally don't take kindly to this story. They all attack Yellow Jacket, landing blows and protecting each other, and clearly are winning the fight. But Yellow Jacket has control of Yellow Jackets, and he uses them to distract Black Panther, which gives him space to hold the Wasp hostage, knocking her out so she can't shrink away. The Avengers can't do anything to help, and so they let him fly away. At Yellow Jacket's base, called the Hornet's Nest, Janet attacks Yellow Jacket, angry that he killed Hank. Yellow Jacket responds by kissing her, in a scene that absolutely has not aged well, and then he backs away, ashamed of what he's done. But now Janet wants him to kiss her again? Elsewhere, the Avengers are hunting for Yellow Jacket, and suddenly get a ping from Janet's locator device. They find her with Yellow Jacket, leaving City Hall, and immediately attack the villain. As they toss him to the ground, Janet stops them. They can't hurt Yellow Jacket. When she's asked why, she explains herself. She's going to marry him. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. If you want to know what happens next, we're recapping 1969 and beyond every Thursday. And if you're interested in exploring Spider-Man's world a little more, there are video essays just for you, including this one about the history of Mary Jane Watson.